All right, let's try this again. This is our child's playroom. He's 4 years old. This room is an absolute mess, blah, blah, blah. I'm making some storage shelves for this room. But for real this time. And this time, my choice of material is not particle board. It's maple veneer plywood. 3/4 inch stuff for the verticals and 1/2 inch stuff for the horizontals, or the actual shelvy bits. And over here, I have a 1/4 inch sheet of Baltic birch plywood to make some nice insert boxes for the shelves, because I was feeling fancy. And this time, to break down these massive sheets of plywood, I bought myself a new tool. I bought a punch cut track saw. Yeah, it's just the cheap Menards brand of track saw. It's a Masterforce. And it only cost me $200, which is extremely cheap for a track saw, which means it's probably not very good. But it's certainly a lot faster than using a circular saw and an edge guide, and it's a lot safer than trying to wrangle this massive sheet of plywood onto my table saw. So anyway, now to cut these rough cut strips down to final size on the table saw. And to show you how all these pieces I just cut are going to come together to form a shelf, I'm going to be using CGI, cardboard generated imagery. The 3/4 inch plywood pieces are going to be the 3 vertical supports. I'm making 2 shelving units, this is why I cut 6 of them. And the 1/2 inch pieces are going to be the shelves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they're going to register, the 1/2 inch pieces are going to register into the 3/4 inch verticals via dados at every intersection point. Pretty simple. And the 3/4 inch pieces are going to protrude just slightly above the top shelf by about a 1/2 inch or so, and the profile of that will look like this, somewhat like this. We'll just have radius corners to make it easy to put the edge banding around. Simple. Now I just need to cut all the dados into the 3/4 inch pieces so that I can assemble the shelf and glue it all together. The dados are cut, the top corners are radius. Now it's time to apply the iron-on edge banding to the front faces of just the vertical pieces for now. I'll do the fronts of the shelves after everything's assembled. Okay, glue up time. Ta-da! 2 completed, assembled, glue-dried shelving units. And the only thing I have left to do, aside from applying finish to them, is to edge band the front edge of the shelves. And now is where it should become apparent why I did the edge banding of the vertical pieces before assembling the shelf. Because the edge banding on these vertical pieces hides the dados, and it was much easier to use my edge banding trimmer tool on the vertical pieces when the shelves were not in place. All right, the shelves are done and I've sent them in the house to be all lacquered up. Now it's time to move on to breaking down this 1/4-inch sheet of Baltic birch plywood to make some insert boxes. And I'm going to be breaking down this sheet on the table saw, because you remember that track saw I was so proud of at the beginning of the video? Yeah, I've already returned it. Oh, by the way, if you're not looking for a spontaneous track saw review, turn away now. The reason I returned that track saw is because I happened to notice when I was breaking down that maple plywood from earlier that the quality of cut that track saw was leaving behind was less than optimal. In fact, it was terrible. It didn't so much look like I cut the wood with a circular saw, it looked like I cut it with either a hand saw or by beating the front half of a beaver into submission, which was odd to me because that saw came with 2 blades. It came with a 24-tooth rough cut blade and a 40-tooth finish blade. And despite the fact that I had been using the finish blade the whole time, my little Ryobi saw here with its 24-tooth blade left a substantially better quality of cut. So to investigate why the quality of cut on this track saw was so terrible, I broke out the dial indicators, and that's when I found out, or my dial gauge, and that's when I found out that the run out on this finishing blade was a whopping 35 thousandths of an inch, which is simply unacceptable. For comparison's sake, my little cheapo Ryobi saw here only had about 7 thou of run out on the blade. Not particularly astonishing, but it's certainly better than 35 thousandths of an inch. So then I thought, well, maybe it was just that finishing blade. Maybe it was poorly manufactured or there was a mistake or something. So I swapped out the 40-tooth finish blade for the 24-tooth rough cut blade that came with the saw. And that 24-tooth rough cut blade, it had 45 thou of run out. You can visibly see the dial indicator moving up and down as I turn the blade around. It's absurdly terrible. That blade was wobbling around in there like Michael J. Fox's hand, which is why the quality of cut was so terrible and why I almost immediately returned it to Menards and got my $200 back. So if you're in one of the regions of the United States that has Menards hardware stores, home improvement stores, big box stores, whatever they're classed as, and you're considering buying the Masterforce 6.5-inch plunge cut track saw, maybe reconsider. Maybe I just had a bad saw. I don't know. I wasn't willing to risk it again. So what I'm going to do in the future is just get a slightly better quality blade for this guy and make a better quality edge guide. Anyway, on to breaking down the plywood. I've got all the handle holes cut in the side pieces of what will be the boxes, and now it's time to do the fun part. And basically the entire reason I wanted to make little insert boxes to begin with, so I can try out making box joints for the first time. As you can see, I've already got my little box joint jig set up as a real quick and simple box joint jig. And I've already tuned it up and I made a couple test boxes to make sure everything's lined up and to try out my technique. And now that that's done, it's time to make the box joint cuts in the real article. My little handle hold side pieces. Right, even though I tested beforehand the finger joint spacing with these small boxes here, it appears to have not scaled up incredibly well because the fingers on these full-size boxes are incredibly tight. So tight, it requires persuasion with the wacky stick to get everything to go into place. I hardly even need glue at this rate. Anyway, I have to get this apart now. I'll worry about the finger joint spacing and the hammer whacking when it comes time to glue everything up. The next step is to cut a groove on the inside bottom of all these panels in which to put the bottom panel in place. So I'm going to do that now. The glue has dried on my boxes and, well, I'm pretty satisfied with them. Now, they're not perfect. They're far from it. There's some little imperfections in the handles where I screwed up. The box joints aren't perfect. There's some gaps here and there. And even on this one, the bottom, I got the panel sized a little bit wrong and there's a slight gap there. But given all the problems I had, like these finger joints being way too tight and having to hammer the boxes together, and this being the first time I'm ever using box joints, I'm pretty satisfied with how they turned out. Now it's time to trim off the corners and give it a light sanding on the outside so that I can take them inside and use them as boxes. And here we are, the finished results in situ with all the crap stacked on and in them and the little insert boxes in place. I had a lot of fun making these little shelving units. A lot more fun than I would have had, say, buying bookshelves from IKEA. That would have been no fun at all. And they would have been made out of particle board and depression. These, they're made out of maple plywood and depression. And it'll be a lot easier to keep the playroom clean now, so that's a nice added bonus. I got to experiment and have fun on a project that's actually useful in the end result. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.